today's goal in my mind is to start to frame this crisis a little bit differently for you so you can start thinking of it in a different way, because you can't really tackle something new until you understand it better. And then when you understand it, you can break it down and start to tackle it in pieces. So that's sort of our objective for today, is to give you the ability to understand it differently, start to break it down for yourself, for your own individual circumstance, and then begin to tackle it. So with that, real quick show of hands. So what's the approximate? I'm just trying to get to the idea of the size of the companies you guys work for. How many work for a company of less than 10 people, all in? Less than 10 to 50 people probably, somewhere in there? 50 to 100? Okay, 100 to 1,000? How about over 1,000? Real big companies. All right, there's our Pico people and probably a couple of the other big names I saw on the list. So we got a good variety in the room, and I think the experience for everybody's a little bit different based on the size of the company you're in, and I think the way you look at the challenges that you're facing and the opportunities that you're facing are different when you're in a 5-person company than when you're in a 1,000-person company. But when you boil it down and you think about the things we talk about today, they all still apply. You just need to apply them in your environment uniquely. And that means you need to think differently about your environment. And I think we're going to get you there to where you can do that. Who's 26 or less in the room in terms of age? Okay, older than 26, the rest of you, I assume? Okay, great. So we got a good mix of ages in the room too, because I think this thing kind of strikes people at different ages and different places in your career. Sometimes you sit comfortably for a while, for a few years somewhere, before you wake up that one morning or in the middle of the night in a sweat, kind of saying, you know, what the hell am I doing? Where am I going? I'm not where I wanted to be, and why am I not where I wanted to be, and why am I not living up to my parents' expectations, and all these kinds of things, or my own expectations. It hits everybody at a different place, so I think it's still relevant. I was just curious. So how about a couple volunteers? Somebody tell me why you came today, why you thought this was an interesting topic. Somebody be bold. Don't make me pick somebody. Come on, we got 90 people in the room.
So I figured I would show up today because as someone who's going through a quasi-quarter life crisis, I'm just looking for people who are in a very similar situation and would be particularly interested in doing some group therapy at a local establishment.
After the event? Make sure you tell me where you're going to be. I'll be there.
Just in case there were any takers in the room.
Okay, very good. Anybody else who wants to get drunk later with Doug? Check in with him. He'll be here after hours. Who else? Anybody else have a different idea? Be brave, people.
I found that no one prepares you for what you're going to do after college, and you think you know what you want to do going into college, and then you start a job and realize that it's not what you wanted to do, or it's totally different than what you thought.
Yeah.
So you're trying to figure out what you want to do and what you're good at.
And that can be deflating and kind of stifling, like, oh my God, you know, I just studied for 4 years, studied my butt off, got the grades, got the job, and now I don't even like the job that I got. And then it's sort of all of a sudden you don't know what to do next. All right, well, let's move on and we'll talk about a few of those things. A little bit about my background. So I went to the University of Delaware, graduated in 1990, just turned 46, so a little older than you folks for the most part. Studied finance and MIS. That's not what I ended up doing. I ended up getting a job with an accounting firm. It was Coopers & Lybrand at the time. It became PricewaterhouseCoopers when we merged in 1998. And I was lucky enough to be in position to become a partner there in 2000. And I was a partner there for 11 years. As a part of that, my favorite part of the job was always coaching and development. And we got to do a lot of it. But I also had all this pesky auditing to deal and all these clients to deal with and business development, trying to bring new business in, things that I grew to not like very much. To the point where I had my midlife crisis, which is your next crisis, thank you very much. And I decided to get the hell out of Dodge and do something differently. I estimate that I had about 12,000 hours of directly professional development and coaching experience during that time. It's a very high-performing environment. We coach a lot of people. We hire 2,400 new college graduates a year into the firm. About 200 of them come to Philadelphia. And I was the guy raising my hand for every panel I could be on, every group discussion, every pump you up kind of thing. And I did a lot of coaching, and I was sort of a sought-after coach within the department for people because I just have a knack for it. Like, I enjoy it and I have a knack for it. So when you're doing something you love, people can sense that. And that's how I sort of came to this sort of major move that I made a year and a half ago and left PwC. So essentially, one partner and I ran a $25 million practice. That was the Philadelphia practice of a group called Risk Assurance. We had about 25 million in revenues. We had over 100 people. And we did that for about 12 years. And almost everybody was under 35. And we churned a lot of people. A lot of people came and left and didn't last and went on to other things. And maybe we're happier, or maybe just maybe we're unhappier. And we'll talk about that and how making a change isn't always the right decision for you. But it was all young people. So I'm very, very seasoned and experienced in this field of what is now being called a quarter-life crisis, for good reason, by the way. So we did client operations work. I had lots of big clients in Campbell Soup, Tasty Cake, Towers Watson, Glaxo. Over the years, I worked with hundreds of companies in Philadelphia doing a variety of different work, and I really loved it. I mean, really loved it when I was doing it. I loved it until I didn't love it. And some of you may be in that position too, where you loved it until a few weeks ago, now you don't love it, and now it's stressing you out. So I started this company called The Edge, and I'll talk a little bit about it later and what I'm doing, but essentially it centers around coaching young professionals. That's my expertise, it's my passion. It's bringing people into a room for a 5-week course and teaching you all those things college doesn't teach you. The things about how to find success in your career, about how to be a leader, how to be a team player, how to manage your career, which most people don't do. You get so mired in it that you're not really managing it. How to network, where to network, why you network. How to get comfortable doing that when you're networking with people who are 20 years your senior, and they could be your mom or your dad, and it's kind of awkward, and you got to learn to have that conversation. Self-development. How do you develop yourself? When do you do that? You guys are going to, you're going to learn a lot about self-development today, because that's really what this crisis is about, is taking stock of yourself and figuring out what you need to do next to make a difference in your career. I got married in 1993 to my college sweetheart. We got 2 kids, Garrett and Carter, 2 great kids. There's my family, and there's Bodie, our dog on the right there. Everybody's doing just great. So take a look at these numbers for a second, and just by yourself, stare at them a little bit. I don't know who likes to do puzzles and problem solving, but can anybody tell me what the progression of these numbers is? Give it some thought. Wish I had music, Jeopardy music. See a lot of people staring at the numbers. Any ideas? Doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, does it? We've all done puzzles like this, right? The SAT had things like this, these intuitive things, right? If you stare at it enough, eventually it's going to come to you. Sometimes it just doesn't come to you, right? So the progression is alphabetically the first letter of that number, right? E, F, N, O, S, T, Z goes in the order of the alphabet. I didn't ask you what the next number was. I asked you what the progression was of the numbers. The reason I put this up is what we're going to talk about mostly today is changing the way you think. And we all know if you take certain puzzles and you turn them on their side and look at them a little differently, sometimes they become easier to solve. I do that with Sudoku and on planes and stuff, and I'll turn it over and all of a sudden I'll be like, oh, it's 9 goes in that slot right there, and then I get 5 more numbers after that. Any puzzle sometimes needs to be turned around a few times before you see it the way that you need to see it in order to solve it. And what you guys are encountering is no less than a puzzle right now. And it's a different puzzle for everybody, but it's going to require you to change the way you think before you can start to tackle it. Any problem requires you to change the way you think and change the way you understand the problem before you can really effectively tackle it. So what we're going to talk about today is, what is it? What's this quarter life thing we're all talking about? How did you get here? Let's redefine it a little bit and talk about it a little differently than maybe you're talking about it among your friends and over beers and whatnot. Talk about how we reframe our thinking. How do you do that? It's like, great, Matt, thanks. Tell me to change my thinking. That's not so easy to do. I've only got one mind, and it works this way, and that's just how it is. Well, I'll challenge you that you can all change your thinking, and I'm going to give you a framework to start to do that today. So then what do? You've reframed it, so what do you do next? And some of that's on the page that you could try and decipher in your hands. And then we'll talk a bit about my company. So this is Wikipedia's definition, right? Period, usually ranging from the late teens to early 30s, in which a person begins to feel doubtful about their lives, brought on by the stress of becoming an adult. It was coined in an analogy to the midlife crisis, which makes logical sense, right? But the quarter life one didn't exist until fairly recently. So when I was a kid, right, and when John was a kid, things were pretty simple. You wanted to go on vacation, you went to a travel agent. And you went to the closest one to your house, and travel agencies thrived because everybody went to their travel agent. There was no internet. There was nowhere else to go. When you wanted the news, you either turned on the TV and you saw a guy like Walter Cronkite or somebody on there telling you what was going on in the world, or you got the newspaper. That was it. You know, there were magazines, Time Magazine, Life Magazine. There were a handful of magazines. There weren't 8 million magazines like there are today on every subject under the sun. That's our phones, right? I mean, for better or for worse. You know, you waited until the dial went back, and then you dialed the next number, and that's sort of what we did. And you had to find one that had they all had cords. They were all attached to something somewhere. And the TVs were like that. The top knob was your VHF, and it got about 12 channels, but only 3 of them actually were channels, 3, 6, and 10. And the bottom one had like 60 or 50 numbers on it, but only like 2 of them were useful. So we had about 5 channels by and large growing up. You guys have a couple more than 5 channels, I think, to choose from when you turn on the television. So this is your life. And this is probably a simple graphic to describe your life. Everything is extremely complicated. The television itself is a nightmare for a lot. I mean, you buy a Samsung TV these days, you're hooking it up to your phone, and like somehow your dog is communicating with it, and all kinds of crazy stuff is happening. You don't even know why. It beeps at weird times, it updates itself, and you don't know what it's updating. You got a million different ways to watch TV. You know, my cousin works at MTV, and she said that they're having trouble getting the advertising industry to understand these days that young people don't watch television anymore. They watch on other devices. They're not sitting in front of a TV as much. And these are even younger people than you, because she's marketing to, you know, teens. But industries are really having to adapt to this. And you guys, as human beings, are adapting to it as well. And you live in a world that is just full of options and choices, and it can be stifling at times if you don't just sort of pick the ones that are for you, simplify your life and your thinking a little bit, and go with it and create a plan and kind of execute your plan. So why I think you're here? Tell me if any of these words resonate with you guys. And I didn't know these were all singly set up like this. Nod your heads if any of these words are floating around in your head at all on certain days, in certain weeks, and in certain weak moments. Crying. All of it relatively normal, like normal stuff. But it does feel very stressful, and it can be extremely emotional to go through it. So it's something that you all came here in one way or another, even though nobody really wanted to raise their hand except a couple brave volunteers to say it. These are the words. These are probably the words that you would have said. And these are the words Doug wants to talk to you about afterwards over a beer, because he's very depressed and anxious, and beer somehow helps. I find the same thing, even at 46. That doesn't go away. So how did you get here, right? So some of the parental help you got growing up didn't really help. Some of that sort of always being there for you and always sort of taking the weight of things off your shoulders and showing you the path to find the solution wasn't helpful. It was well meant, but it didn't end up in the end being helpful, because you were going to be let loose at some point into the world to deal with all these things on your own. So some parents did a great job of that, and they made you do things on your own. They made you make your own way. They made you work at a young age. Some of the worst parents out there created the most self-empowered, self-directed kids, because those kids had to grow up quick and early. But the closer your parents were to you, the more they helped you with things as you grew up, the more of a challenge you have later as you start to feel the burden of all these extra things at a time where you've already got the burden of having to pay your own bills, of living out on your own, of having to buy your own clothes, do your own laundry, deal with roommates, deal with bosses, and all this other shit that comes into your life. And meanwhile, you know, you don't even know how to do really basic things like wash your own dishes and stuff, and you're still maybe wanting to go home. And a lot of people are going and living at home, which is great. It's a great way to save money. But when you're living at home, how are you living at home? And I'll talk about that briefly. You did some things right and you have some regrets. Don't dwell on your regrets. Dwell on the things you did right, because that's going to help you to identify your strengths and your passions and the things you enjoy to do and the things you're good at doing. Do not dwell on the mistakes you made. I've made a million mistakes in my life, and I've always looked right past them and looked forward and said, what am I going to do next? How am I going to do it differently the next opportunity I get to do it? Do I need to study about this thing because I don't really get it that well? It's not coming naturally to me. So do I need to do some self-study and go develop myself, either through mentors or through reading or through the web in some way or another? There's a great TED Talk. If you have a pen, write this down. I'll put this on the resource page, I think, if they'll let me put a TED Talk reference or a video reference on there. Meg Jay does a great talk called 30 is Not the New 20. And it's 14 minutes long, but it's very interesting, and it helps you to frame some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Essentially what she's saying is you guys are growing up in a different world with a mindset almost that your 20s are kind of this, I'll wait and do those things later, those other big things that I want to do, because we're going to work 10 years longer than our parents did anyway, so I've got an extra 10 years. And somewhere in your mid-20s, you start to realize, that's not what I want to do. That's not right for me, and it starts to stress you out. And some of your friends who landed the right job or the lucky job right off the bat, who are maybe working harder than you perhaps, are starting to have more in their lives than you have, and you're starting to wonder, what am I missing? What am I doing wrong? Well, some of that you can work on, and some of it is harder to work on. You can't tell when you're going to fall in love with somebody and start a relationship. That's just happenstance and luck in a lot of ways. You can't control it. But a lot of it you can control, and we'll talk about today the things you can control. I can't help you too much with the things I can't help you control or the things you can't control. So start thinking about these questions. Are you really taking ownership of things? Just being here tonight is starting to take ownership of things. The fact that you took an interest in this subject matter is starting to take ownership of something. You need to take ownership. Nobody can do it for you. This is your life. If you're at home, are you contributing? Are you doing everything you can to be an equal contributor to what goes on in that house? Are you doing the dishes? Are you doing the laundry? Are you paying your own way for things? Do you ever buy the groceries on your dime instead of your parents' dime? Are you asking your parents how to manage certain things that you don't know how to do? When somebody's hanging up a picture in the house and you don't know how to hang a picture, are you asking, hey, can I watch you do that? Because soon enough, you're going to be hanging your own pictures, and you want to know how to do it, and it's happening all around you, but are you taking advantage of that opportunity? So living at home is great financially, but it can be another thing that holds you back if you're not contributing and not growing up and maturing in that environment. So when you're at home, don't act like you're still 18 years old or 20 years old. Act your age and start to think about things a little differently. How can I make a difference in the household? How can I be a little bit more adult than maybe I'm used to being in the household if you're still in the household? Budgeting and independence can be cathartic. Where do you spend your money? How much comes in? How much goes out? I always tell people, if you're spending any more than 75% of your salary, you're going to get yourself in trouble. If you spend 75% or less of your salary and you're saving the rest of it for a rainy day or for your retirement, you're going to feel more comfortable. Any other stresses that go on in your life, at least you won't have to stress about that because you're managing your money and you're managing it wisely. It's hard to do, but it's not really hard to do. And there's a million books out there that you can get, and spreadsheets and sort of worksheets you put together. You get quicken. Once you start paying attention to it and owning it, it feels good. It's empowering to do that. You feel independent. You feel like you're controlling one aspect of your life, the financial aspect of your life, based on what your income is. So you want to be doing that. So a couple of quick stories. I remember a girl came into my office one time. She was in her second year, and she was sobbing, and she wanted to talk. And when we finally got around to it, she didn't know. I don't know what it is. I don't know what I want to say. I'm just so frustrated. When we finally got down to it, she just said, feedback is hard. Hearing that she wasn't doing things right, or that she wasn't presenting herself right to the client, was really hard for her to get, because she had been a high performer all through school and she was really proud of herself, and she'd gotten this great job at PwC, and all of a sudden she's an average performer and she's getting reviews that are not saying you suck, but she's hearing you suck, and she's hearing the wrong thing. The message would never have been delivered that way in our environment. The message would have been delivered, hey, we got something we want you to work on. You've got to develop your ability to do this when you're communicating with clients. And by the way, I'll help you, because it was a very sort of helping environment. But she just was stuck. The moment she heard the feedback, she got stuck on, I suck. And she couldn't get off of it. Don't get stuck on I suck. You don't suck. Another guy said he's not loved enough, right? So this was a third-year guy who didn't get a promotion. He was expecting it. He didn't get it. I had a long talk with him about why he didn't get the promotion and why that's a good thing, and the extra year was going to buy him some really important developmental time that he couldn't understand. And we talked about it 3 or 4 times. He did end up staying. He's still with the firm. It's 6 years later. He's a director now, and he's doing really well. And he continuously thanks me for helping him over that hurdle of getting stuck on, I'm not feeling the love, instead of realizing there's a reason why you're not getting this promotion. We're not just trying to be jerks. We talked about you a lot, and here's what we talked about. And you have your development points. They're right there in your plan and in your feedback. Take a look at them, own them, and start to make a few changes. You do so many things well, but there's these few things you need to work on, and now you've got a year to work on them. Look at that as an opportunity. You're only 25 years old. You've got a lot of working left to do. So don't be in such a hurry. Steve, and these aren't real names obviously, right? Steve came right around the same time that Mark came with a similar message, but his message ended with, not that I didn't get promoted, I just hate this job. I just can't stand it anymore. I need to do something different. In which case the conversation was over. I said, well, great. How can we help you find something else? How can you tap into our networks to go find something else? We'd love you to land somewhere at a client somewhere, and maybe someday you'll buy services from us. So we want to help you. And we helped him get out, and he actually went over to Exelon. And he had a great career from there, and he's perfectly happy, but he's doing something very different from the auditing that he was doing at PwC. Sometimes you know it's wrong, and you're not leaving for the wrong reasons. You're leaving for the right reasons for you, and you're moving on to something new, and that's okay too. My story was, I remember in my 4th year, I didn't get promoted. This is back in 1994, and I was really angry and really anxious, and I went out with my reviewer, my coach, and we had lunch, and I remember we were downtown somewhere here, and he's trying to explain to me, you know, so he was having trouble putting it into words, and it's difficult to put into words, but essentially he was trying to say, the cake needs to bake a little longer. You're not ready for this move. And he couldn't describe all the softer things as to why. And within a year, by the end of that year, I absolutely understood. By the end of a month and a half, I understood what he was saying. I needed to look up from the page and learn some skills that otherwise I wasn't focused on. I thought because I could do the technical thing really well, that I was ready for promotion. He was saying, no, this promotion means you're going to become a member of our leadership team. If you want to be a member of this leadership team, there are a whole bunch of other skills that you need to have to effectively discharge your responsibilities as a leader in this environment. And I can't hand you client relationships to own until you've sort of mastered those skills. So he opened my eyes, and all of a sudden I was like, it was like a green field for me. I was like, wow, this is cool. I have lots of new questions to ask. I have a new way of looking at it. But it took those couple of conversations with him for me to get over the hump. And then the further conversations I had with people as I went out and explored the subject of soft skills more. And lo and behold, here I am years and years later teaching courses on soft skills. That's exactly what I teach, because nobody teaches you that stuff in school. There's a big gap there. So that's what I teach now. So who knows the end of this one? Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime, right? How does this relate to us? Somebody's got to be a little braver. Come on, I just framed it for you. I love it when everybody is silent. Do you generally understand how it relates to us? Can you at least nod and say, yeah, I sort of see that, right? We're going to teach you how to fish, right? You're focused on the day-to-day. You're focused on the little aspects of your job and treating people well and getting dressed and trying to be on time. And you need to learn more about your career. You need to think about your entire career from where you are today, take stock of where you've been to where you want to be and how you're going to get there. And there's a lot more to it than just showing up every day. So the idea of sort of filling your head with a little bit more of a new way of thinking, a little bit more knowledge around this quarter-life crisis is one step toward teaching you how to fish. School doesn't do it. I mean, career centers have all kinds of courses in leadership and all kinds of little things you can get if you're active at your career center, but by and large, it's academics that are teaching you. It's not people that have been in the business world and actually done it. So, you know, they've been in an academic world, which is a very different world to grow up in. So they teach it, but they're teaching it academically, not experientially. They're not teaching it from having been through it, having seen people go through it. So you don't tend to get a ton out of those courses. A lot of this is a mindset change from education matriculation to your career, and it takes a number of years. Sometimes it takes 10 years. Some people never get out of it. 20 years later, you meet them, and they still act like a senior in high school, and they never crossed over. That mindset of each year I'm going to matriculate to the next year. I'm going to get that sort of brass ring. Oh, I finished 8th grade, I'm going to go to 9th grade. I finished middle school, I'm going to go to high school. Got through my junior year, I'm going to get to my senior year. Those transitions are almost like a reward that comes every year, and you come to expect that reward. And you know, further, some people in your generation, more so than mine, were on teams where you got trophies for losing. You know, like the worst, you know, my kids get trophies when they're on the worst team because, God forbid, you don't give a trophy to everybody in the league, or it's like a lawsuit risk or something like that. Any lawyers in the room? Okay, good. Too many lawyers out there. But that's hard to break out of because careers aren't that way. You don't get a promotion every year. You know, Enterprise Rent-A-Car in recent years has been employing a new strategy where they give you a promotion on paper almost every 6 months. So people will be there and they're all excited because they're 2 years there and they've had 7 promotions already in 2 years. The promotions don't mean anything, but Enterprise figured something out, which is people just want the title. They want to feel acknowledged and recognized. You have to try and shake yourself of that, and you need to take pride in the things that you're accomplishing and not expect everything to move in annual cycles. Careers simply don't work that way. When you reset that expectation a little bit and you develop your patience in your career, things open up to you because you're not always kind of feeling like you're not getting yours. And I think there's a tendency to start feeling that way, and then it grows inside you and it becomes almost inescapable that something's not happening. Somebody's not doing something for you that they're supposed to be doing for you that you believe you've earned, but they don't believe you're there yet. And therefore they're wrong, so now you need to go do something else. You want to twist that a little bit and say, maybe they're right. Maybe they do have my best interest in mind. Maybe there are things I still need to learn, even though I feel like I've mastered this thing in front of me. Maybe the job's broader than I think, that promotion, that next job. Often what you don't know about the next job is what keeps you from getting that next job. When you start to learn about it, you realize there were a lot of things you didn't know yet. So plan a goodbye party for your education mindset and a welcome party for a new mindset, which is going to be a 30 or 40 year prosperous career. You're going to be happy and healthy and you're going to have all these good things happen in your life. Get off of the year to year to year, because it can really stifle you and it can cause you to make a lot of mistakes in your career because you're hurrying for something that you think you're going to attain by rushing. And sometimes the best answer is to be patient, take a deep breath, take stock of where you are, and start to plan out just the next few years in smaller chunks. Takes courage. It definitely takes a lot of hard work. I mean, you know if you're a hard worker out there, and you know if you're not a hard worker. I'll tell you, like I tell in all my classes, if you're not a hard worker, you're not going to have great success. That just doesn't happen. So hard work is always the starting point for the success that you want to have. So if you're not a hard worker, look hard in the mirror and maybe come up with some new models for yourself and figure out how you can give more to your career. Because you want more out of your career. You get what you give. So a quick story on work-life balance. We talked about this for years at PwC because it started to happen in the 90s where people started, I don't have any work-life balance. Where's my work-life balance? So we started to say, okay, we're going to give you work-life balance and here's what it looks like, and we're going to give you an extra vacation day, and we're going to tell you on Fridays that you can wear jeans and things like that. And we tried all kinds of things. But somewhere along the line we realized we're using the wrong term. Work-life balance implies a scale that is balanced. And work-life, it doesn't balance. Some people are lucky enough to have jobs where it does balance, and you spend just as much time, in your life as you do working. Most people, you're going to work more than you're going to have your life. So we started framing it as work-life integration. How do you integrate the two in a way that you can tolerate, that still keeps you happy in and out of work, and keeps you fulfilled, but at the same time recognizing that there's not going to be this balance you're going to achieve. You won't feel that, especially if you're a high performer and you want to find success in your career. It just won't happen that way. So the expectation setting changed for people, and we found that it really resonated with people when they started to think about it a little bit different, similar to the number problem that we started with, right? So if you think about the quarter-life crisis, does that sound empowering to you? I mean, when you hear that, does it make you feel powerful? I'm going through a quarter-life crisis. Yeah. You don't really get that feeling, right? So isn't that maybe a bad starting point to begin with, right? Crisis is overwhelming. I mean, it comes with a lot of emotions that you're suffering a crisis. God, I mean, you think about where we use the word crisis and, epidemics and diseases and the environment and things like that. Crisis is kind of a reserve word for really huge stuff. How about we think about opportunity, And I know you hate it when older people say this, right? Like, oh, turn it into an opportunity, There was a great, you guys wouldn't remember these deep thoughts from Saturday Night Live, but there was a funny one that said, if you think you could turn a weakness into a strength, I got some bad news for you. That's another weakness. But in this case, you can. I promise you can. And if you don't reframe it as an opportunity, you're just going to stay stuck where you are. You have to start thinking of it less of a crisis, more of an opportunity. So from here out, I'm just going to call it the quarter-life opportunity and go from there. Everybody cool with that? No more crisis. No crisis here. So crisis, the word, is derived from a Greek word which means decision, right? So if we were looking at this as a crisis points are decision points. Crisis points often come at points where you have to face a change, and people do not like change. Trust me, we did a lot of change work at PwC, and corporations and departments and groups, small and large, everybody resists change. I absolutely resist change. It took me a long time to decide to leave PwC, but it was freeing when I finally made the change. Crisis means you've got some decisions coming up. You've got to decide where you want to be, who you want to be, where is your future going to be, and start to whittle that down. Not all is one big thing, but we'll talk about breaking it down a little bit. Public speaking, big meetings, getting a warning from the doctor, the environment, going through a divorce. These are all crises that often turn into opportunities. People go through a bad divorce. At the end of it, 3 years later, they realize their life sucked. They were miserable, and now they've met somebody new, and now they're happy again, and they're happier than they ever were or would have been had they stayed in the marriage. The environment is a true crisis. If we start to address it, it becomes an opportunity to fix something that is going wrong. Whether or not you believe in environmental, we don't need to get into the debate. Same thing with public speaking. You get out and you do your first public speaking and you're sweating and you're nervous and you're scared to death. You get a lump in your throat, and then you do it and you did fine, or you learned a few things, but you came out of it and you realized, I just got one under my belt. I just did one. I just did a talk in front of a group, and what better way to get good at public speaking than to do it? You've got to do it. So it's challenge, it's scary, but on the other side of it, it became an opportunity that you embraced and took advantage of. And don't fly away. The fight or flight instinct, if you haven't read about it, you could read about the fight or flight instinct. It's been written about and talked about for years and years, right? Causes you, when you're facing a crisis or a difficult situation, to either sort of fight it out and figure out a way to tackle it, or to just sort of ignore it and say, I'll deal with it tomorrow, and kind of put it off and put it off and put it off. That fight or flight thing can become habit. And if your habit becomes that you always sort of just, I'm not dealing with that, and you go the other way, you will not get out of the situation you're in. You've got to sort of stay and fight a little bit. And today's, a bit of a first step of that. Steve Jobs, when he got fired from Apple, it's a guy who could have packed it up and he could have said, I'm worthless and things aren't going well and I drove the company into the ground. Well, he went and started a little company called Pixar, which ultimately got bought by Disney, and he became, in one day, the largest shareholder of Disney overnight, from having gotten fired as the CEO of Apple. That's a guy who stayed and he fought, came up with another idea, put it forward, worked on it, developed it, and sold it. And then ultimately came back to Apple, So you got to embrace change. And even embracing change, just embracing this change is also a skill set. And they call it change agility. I don't know if anybody ever heard that term in your workplace. It's a workplace term that gets used a lot among HR people. Change ability is your ability to adapt and move as the circumstances change around you. Change agility is really important. We used to hire people and ask questions in the interviews and assess their ability to change on a dime. We'd ask questions like, tell me about a time where just something completely unexpected happened and you needed to change the way you did things, and what did you learn from it? And they'd come up with a story and they'd tell us after some thinking, and we would assess their change agility. Do they understand what that means to be able to change when change is necessary? So if we frame this opportunity a little bit, it's your next step into adulthood. It's really important to make this leap. You're adults, yes, but at the same time, there are aspects of adulthood that are causing you anxiety because you don't know how to deal with them and you don't know how to handle them in your life. Be it your work, be it your finances, be it your relationships. It's things, as Dr. Livio said, as your brain continues to develop and make a lot of new connections in your 20s, it's things that you're building the capacity to deal with. So it's an important step to make, and you can't delay it indefinitely. It's got to come at some point. And if you do try and delay it indefinitely, you become that guy who's my age who still acts like an 18-year-old. And I don't think anybody in this room is looking to do that. Ownership, yay, right? Own your life and your career. It's empowering. You got to think about it that way. I mean, being down about it is not going to get you anywhere. Think about ownership. Think about taking stock. Think about coming out of here today and saying, what am I going to do tomorrow that's different from what I did before, because of what we heard Dr. Livio and Matt Miades talk about tonight. I mean, you got to do it. If you walk away, you'll forget this stuff. It'll fall out of your head. It'll just have been, a night out at the chamber, and it'll just disappear. If you embrace it, and you can be empowered by it in a big way. But you got to take it seriously. It is a positive thing. And I'm going to keep saying this, and I do this in my course about personal branding. I do the same thing. I hammer a lot of points a lot, the exact same point. And there's a reason for it, because it's the most important thing for you to take this step, changing the way you think. And these benefits will stay with you forever. This is a big developmental stage for everybody. So years ago, after I dealt with lots of young professionals, and I realized they were sort of dealing with this quarter-life crisis before it had this name, that I kept giving them the same advice over and over. I kept telling the same stories, and I'm like, why don't I just write this shit down and, like, you know, send it out to everybody in the group? Ultimately, I wrote it down. We sent it out to everybody in the region. So we sent it to hundreds of people, not because it was so great, but just because, you know, to those of us that had been around a good while, it was fundamental. And to all the young people that read it, it was kind of like, oh, yeah, I guess that makes sense. And people started calling it my manifesto, which was really embarrassing, but that was around when Jerry Maguire, that movie, came out, and he had like a manifesto or something. I don't even remember the movie that well. So there were a few key points in it, right? The education view keeps you focused on the trees, doesn't allow you to zoom out and focus on the forest. Boredom is normal, and it's good at times. When you get bored with the day-to-day aspects of your job, that's the time when you could do your job without looking, and you can look up and watch leaders lead, and watch teams interact. Watch clients interact with your company, and how do they interact, and why do they do what they do? When you're still looking down and you're learning nuts and bolts, that's great, and it seems busy and all that, but you don't have an opportunity to grow your soft skills and to learn about the bigger things that are going to allow you to become a member of management at some point in your life and a leader. So when you get bored, it's not always a bad thing. But now, if you're bored and you're looking up and everybody sucks, and you know they suck, and they're bad managers and they're not good people to learn from, well, maybe you're in the wrong place, because you're bored of what's down here and you have nothing left to learn up here. But by and large, if you look up for a little while and you look a little differently, and mind you, you can learn just as much from bad managers as you can from good managers. You learn things you never want to do when you get into management yourself. And that's important to learn. You need to know what a bad manager looks like in order to not become one yourself. So I talked about focusing on softer skills, and that's what you do. That's with the networking, the self-development, self-presentation. How do I look? How do I care for myself? How do I take care of people? Am I a good coach? Am I a good mentor? Am I a good team player? Those kinds of things. And then we also talked about developing a career view, which is another part of the manifesto, thinking about the longer term. I mean, if you think Mick Jagger goes out and plays, Jumping Jack Flash, 150 shows a year, if you think it's exciting for him every time he has to sing that damn song, you're wrong. It's not. I think of a doctor that seems so, this exciting life of a doctor that treats, 17 colds, 3, broken limbs, and like the same cadre, small cadre of things on a daily basis every day. That sounds great, you're a doctor, but that's boring as hell, right? So like, what makes it exciting for the doctor? Any career you could think of, there's an aspect of boredom that goes with it that is very normal. Well, once you have a career view and you start thinking more long term, you don't get bored as easily. You're a little bit more patient, which is the next thing. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint. You're not in a race to achieve something. You're not in a race with your friends or anybody else. If life is a race, it's a race with yourself, and that's it. So have some patience, and good things will come to you. Is it normal? Yes, it's very normal. Is failure normal? Absolutely. I've failed a million times in my career. I fail regularly. Failing's how we learn. Sometimes you have to fail multiple times before you learn how to do something new and different. It's how you think about it that matters. I'll skip the UPHS story. So how do you reframe it, right? Redefining yourself as yourself. It's all about your perspective, right? Thinking about you. Having a career view means you need to focus on yourself and not focus on what everybody else is or isn't doing for you, with you, to you, what have you. And a lot of people get stuck in this rut of it's always somebody else that didn't do something that's causing good things not to come to you. Well, the truth is that's not a very empowering way to look at it. It's just that's living your life as if your life is happening to you and as if you don't have any control over it. That's sort of the fate view that, whatever happens, happens and I have zero control over it. That's not a good way to take charge, especially at this age. You're great. You need to know it. You're great. Everybody's great. Everybody's unique. Everybody has some special skill to offer. Everybody does something really well. Maybe you're a great researcher and you get, you can answer a question using the internet better than everybody, but you're not a good presenter or communicator. Everybody's good at something. But remember, don't go into work saying, I'm great. In your next review, say, Matt said I'm great, and you seem to be saying here I'm not great. So can we call Matt? Perception is still reality at work. If somebody thinks you're not great, well then you're not great to them. And if that happens to be your boss or your reviewer, you got to get to the bottom of what it is that they're looking for and try and figure out in a different way how to satisfy that person or how to exceed their expectations. And sometimes those people will be bad bosses. But that's a skill too, learning how to please a bad boss. Usually, one of the hints is make them look good. I'm sure a lot of you have bosses that always want you to make them look good, and when something goes wrong, they blame you for it. Well, that's a bad boss. That doesn't mean it's a bad environment. It doesn't mean you can't learn a lot being there. But you got to reframe it a little bit. Instead of feeling like that boss is doing stuff to you, try and figure out how can I please the boss first. So that's checklist item number one. And then how can I turn that to my advantage? And ultimately, a little further down the list, how can I take his or her job? Because I'm earning it right now and I'm proving it. And that person is not going to last long here because the word's going to get out that that person doesn't know what they're doing and I do. And that may take a year or two to get there, but that's where your patience comes in a little bit. It's hard to see yourself and your brand without flipping how you think, right? I used to always counsel people the night before we would do interviews. And we'd have 80 college students in a room, and we had interviews the next day with all of them. And I would do this speech the night before, and I would always tell them when you're asked experiential questions, everyone would shy away from their job as a waiter, their job as a clerk, their job as a lifeguard, because they thought the only job they could talk about was the summer job when they were working at an actuarial firm, even they were really just cleaning the storage room and reorganizing the files. But they could only talk about that one professional internship they have. That's bullshit. It's so wrong. It's the wrong way to think of it. If you were a waiter, a waitress, a host, a hostess, you learn more about client service doing that job. You learn more about bad leadership and good leadership and teamwork. You learned about deadlines. You learned about how to deal with conflict when you had difficult customers. It's the same thing in your real career if you have customers and clients. You're going to have pesky ones, you're going to have good ones. But you learned a lot about that. If you were a lifeguard, you learned about policies and protocols, or a camp counselor. You learned how important it is to follow a rigid set of protocol on how to do things. That's important. People admire that in you. You need to present yourself that way on your resume instead of lifeguard, so-and-so pool. It's lifeguard, and your bullet points aren't, stood and watched the kids, blew my whistle at times. Your bullet points are those skills that you got. Learn the importance of protocol. Learned how to work as a team. Learned about time management if you had to be on shift work and that kind of thing. So start to think about yourself that way. If any of you are putting a resume together, start thinking about couching yourself that way. But you can't write it. You can't even come up with the words until you start thinking of yourself and your skill sets a little bit differently. And I had a quick story that I'll skip about a lawyer, but he's 2 years into his career as a lawyer and he doesn't want to be a lawyer anymore. And he can't even describe in any words to me what he's done for the last 2 years. I don't know how to describe it. I would summarize cases and I'm like, well, what were the cases about? And how did you do a summary? And what is a summary? I'm not a lawyer. I have no idea what a summary even is. Like, sort of feeding him the words and trying to help him to turn this into his brand because it's a strong brand. So it all starts with brand, right? So this is somebody, a coach counseling the cow. Don't oversimplify yourself. You could do a lot of things. You're also a dairy consultant, an expert on calcium, and a hay connoisseur to boot. So you're not a cow. It's great you're a cow, but that's pretty generic. You put on your resume that you're a cow, you're probably not going to get the job. But you put those other 3 things on there, all of a sudden you're going to beat the other cows out for that job, hands down. This is just a good thinker's quote, Watch your thoughts, they become words. Watch your words, they become actions. Watch your actions, they become habit. Watch your habits, they become character. Watch your character, it becomes your destiny. I tried to find out who it was from, but it's attributed to like 5 different people. Think about who you want to be and where you want to be. Think about your actions, your words, your thoughts, and how they drive you today. If you have a lot of negative thoughts, well, negative thoughts are going to become sort of negative talking. You're going to be bitching all the time to everybody about how things are just not working out for you. And then you bitch and you get used to bitching, and then you go out and have more bitch sessions with everybody. And you start to get used to it, and you start to enjoy it, and then you start to add more people to the group. And before you know it, you've got a big group of people whining and accomplishing nothing. And that's not where you wanted to go. It's not what you intended to do.
I have a question about that because I'm encountering that at work right now, where someone who sits with me is so negative, and I'm the opposite. I'm usually a really positive person, but she's bringing me down with her, and I can't take it anymore. But what do you do to stop it?
Well, I mean, if there's some way you can broach it with that person, you try. If you can ask to sit somewhere else, you try. If you can go with the headphone approach, you try. I mean, it's very environment specific, but I get it. It can be draining. And you don't want anybody to suck you in with them. And that's why I always tell people, avoid the water cooler talk. Avoid the, people who are just sitting around kind of complaining, because it becomes sort of addictive. It's something that you get used to doing and you find comfort in it. But it really is very unproductive. In fact, it's sort of negatively productive. It can hold you back and even pull you backwards in your career. When life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? So again, perspective, turning things to your advantage, thinking about things a little bit differently, focusing on the good. there's no good that comes from focusing on the bad. There's no benefit from you that ever comes from focusing on bad things going on in your life, your relationships, your careers. There's no benefit. Now, I know you can't turn it off, and you can't turn off emotions, and you can't turn off natural things, but you can spend a little time trying to think about the positive side of things that are going on in your life, because everybody's got good things going on in their life too. Everybody's got unique abilities and ability to do things. People have a really happy family, and they can sort of find solace there when they're with their family. Well, spend more time with your family and less time with the people that are draining you and bringing you down. If your friends are still sort of hanging on to college life more than you really want to, you don't have to change your friends, but you can sort of change your behavior a little bit and not put yourself in that environment, and pick another environment, something interesting, something new, a new hobby. Go skydiving, you know, go cliff diving, or do something you've always wanted to do. They don't have to be life-threatening things. They could also, you know, start reading more books or something, you know, much safer. I don't do those things either. Expect hurdles. You're going to have a lot of them. And this is one of them, and this is a big one, and this is one that has a lot of pieces to it. But expect hurdles big and little throughout your career. You're going to keep running into them. Don't get weighed down from them. Don't let them hold you back. Move on from them. Figure out your way over them and move on from them. And by the way, while you're moving on, try and take a quick look back and say, what did I learn in getting over that hurdle? And if you want, and I always did this, you just take stock of it. Write it down somewhere, because that becomes your resume someday later. Those things become the amassing of your resume. All these things that you've learned about the world, having been through good situations and having been through bad situations. Come up with a plan. You need a plan to address things. If you've got a hurdle and it's a big one, you've got to sit back and take time and look at the hurdle and maybe turn it on its side and maybe go over here and look at it a little differently. But you've got to look at it a little bit differently if you want to get something out of this step that you're taking, which might be painful at the time. But if you plan and you come up with a few steps, I'm going to do these few things over the next month that I think are going to get me through this hurdle, and you know, I think that'll work. And talk to people, talk to your friends and family and your coworkers, people you trust, about how you're planning to approach it. It becomes a really interesting dialogue. I mean, if all the dialogue that people, if all the time people spend bitching about work was dialogue about soft skills and learning, and what did you learn today? You know, what did you learn? Instead of like, how did you get shit on today? And like, I can't wait to tell you how I did. You know, if you change that dialogue a little bit and you talk about learning and development, it becomes addictive too. It becomes something you want more of. I want more of this development stuff. This is great. I enjoy this. I'm growing as a person. And you've got to execute. That comes back to that hard work. None of this is going to happen without some hard work. And it'll feel good. It'll feel good. Having control brings comfort, confidence, and it brings a path forward. You can see a future that maybe you couldn't see before you took that control. So invest in yourself. Stop worrying about other people. Stop thinking about 7 or 11 jobs. The crazy thing that gets out there. Everybody, young people always think, oh, I'm going to have 7 careers in my life, because somebody somewhere said that once and now everybody believes it. That's ridiculous. You might have 1 career and 1 job your entire life. Believe that. Because then otherwise you're always itching to move. Like, oh, okay, it's time to move. It's been 2 years. I guess I got to move now. That's a ridiculous way to look at things. Doesn't make any sense. Whether you're happy and whether you're learning is what matters in the environment that you're in. And the 7-11 rule, if you don't know it, is people make 11 judgments about you in the first 7 seconds that they meet you. So that's, you know, I only mention that because we talk about that in my course a lot, about self-presentation and personal brand. People make a ton of judgments really quick. How you dress, how you shake hands, your eye contact, your posture, all those things very quickly. And that's sort of a scientific thing, right? I don't know where it comes from. I guess I should have attributed that to somebody. But it's important. That's better. Instead of 7-11 jobs, the 7-11 rule. Check your expectations. They may be too high. They may be too low. You've got to check them from time to time. You've got to revisit, you know, am I really going to be CEO of Coca-Cola by the time I'm 30? You know, it's just I'm 27 now, and, you know, I'm still delivering pastries, and, you know, I'm not sure I'm going to get there. But check your expectations. You've got to set the bar at an achievable and reasonable place that is still a reach for you today. And the bar doesn't need to be set as to your final career ambition. You know, I'm going to be the president of this. The bar could just be the next step that you'd like to take for yourself. Make it reasonable, make sure it's achievable. And sometimes resetting that helps you to not be as disappointed in what's happening today, because you realize you're striving for something that's not likely to happen for you, so you reset it. Or you realize you're being lazy, you're not working hard enough, and you got to set the bar higher for yourself. Moving the bar around from time to time and revisiting that at least annually makes a lot of sense for you. Don't forget to include your personal goals. We talked about work-life integration. When you ever sit down and set goals, you've got to have personal goals in there, things you want to do for you, things that make you feel good inside, things like hobbies, things like relationships, things like your health. You've got to make room for that. It's always got to be in your plan. I always emphasize that very hard when I coach young people, because sometimes people get so mired in the career thing that they lose sight of everything else. And then they wake up at 30 and say, my life is empty. All I do is work, sleep, work, sleep, work, sleep. That'll be miserable for anybody to end up in that situation. One of my partners used to say to younger people, think of yourself as an owner. It's a good mental mindset to have at work. Are you acting as if you were the owner of that company? So are you doing things, is every action you take, would you take that same action if the owner was standing right next to you? If you think of yourself that way, you might start to handle your work situations a little differently. You might handle your day-to-day behavior at work a little bit differently. Think of yourself like an owner. You will get noticed. I promise you. We always noticed, and we always discussed in management meetings with pride, the people that acted like partners, and they were only 23 years old, but they cared for the company, they cared about their job, they cared about quality, they cared about their clients, they were doing everything right. They were truly thinking like an owner. So some of this we already talked about. Watch your relationships. If you're not happy, get out, you know, just like your job. If you're not happy and it's taking the life out of you, you got to find a way out, and it's not always easy. Do something new. Break down your current situation into pieces. What am I doing for money? What am I doing job-wise? What do I do for my hobbies? The different pieces. How am I doing in my relationships? And think about them independently, because they all fit together to create this sort of feeling of crisis that I'm saying if you can break each one down, you can look at each one and say, what opportunity do I have in this space to improve myself? Stop looking back. It's killing you. You got to network more. It's great that you guys are here. Keep coming to these events. Keep supporting the chamber. This is a great way to meet people. When you come, realize you're here to get cards and then to connect with people on LinkedIn. That's what you do. You talk to people briefly, then you move on to the next person. You get their card, you understand a little bit about them, then you know them, they're part of your network, and you connect with them. That's why you come to these things. I'm shocked at how many people come and don't connect afterwards when I go to these events. And if you need to or you want to clean up your online presence, now's a good time to do it. And get actively involved in LinkedIn. When you walk out of here, if you do nothing else, if you're not on LinkedIn, get on LinkedIn and start connecting with people who are in your current network. Friends, family, coworkers, and whatnot. That network is going to be the thing you're going to fall back on when you do want to change jobs. But if you wait until you're sick of your job to start doing that, it's kind of too late and you don't have the advantage of using your network. If you start now when you're at a job, it's a great time to start. Even if you haven't started, start. So should I stay or should I go? Real quickly, map your job. Think about your job. Is it the work I like? Do I like the people? Do I like the hours? Do I like the dress code? Do I like the content of the job? Do I like the culture? Do I like the commute? Map it out. See how much of that stuff is bothering you. If 3 out of 4 of those things you really hate and they're driving you crazy, maybe this isn't the right job for you right now. Because 3 of the 4 aspects of the job that you can't change, you don't like. So maybe you're in the wrong place. So map it out. What are your root causes? Why are you upset with those things? Are you just complaining because they want you to work 8 hours a day and you're like, I don't like those hours. I was thinking maybe 4, maybe 5 on a Wednesday, but I'm not working 8. Figure out what's the root cause. Why am I unhappy with that thing? Or are they working like a girl I met with this week? Are they working you 14 hours a day where you can't have a life outside of work and you've got no promotion prospects? That's different. That's a real solid root cause that you don't like the hours for a reason that means something to you. I always told people, if you're unhappy at your job, wait 90 days. Don't jump too quickly. No matter what's put in front of you, wait 90 days and see if things change. That doesn't always apply, but if you can do it, sometimes buying yourself that extra time gives you an opportunity to see things a little differently. Maybe that hurdle goes away and you get over that problem. Maybe they hire a new boss or fire your boss and all of a sudden you love the new person. A lot can happen in 90 days, but more than anything, it buys you time to think a little bit about what you're doing before you jump. The grass is not always greener on the other side. And if you work with, how many people work with recruiters or recruiters talk to them from time to time ever? They're in it for one thing, to get their payday and get out. And they're not bad people, but I'm saying, they want to get paid and they want to get out. They do care about you, but they will always paint that job as being better than where you are today. And that's part of their job, and they're just doing their job to say that. So if you are ready to leave, be certain it's the right decision for you. I'm going faster now because I'm getting the high sign here. Look while you're employed if possible. It's always easier to look for a job when you have a job. Use all your resources when you're doing research. That's hard to say. You use your network. Talk to people. Don't do it secretly by yourself. That can add a lot of weight to it. As you talk to people and you get new ideas and you find out things you didn't know before, and maybe you make a connection with somebody who's looking for somebody just like you to start at the end of the month, you wouldn't know that unless you really reached out. So use all the resources available to you. And don't get stuck. I already talked about relationships a little bit. I'll talk briefly about my company because I'm running out of time here, right? I got a passion for helping people. I got a knack for doing this kind of thing because I've done it for so many years. And when you care about something and you've done it a lot, you know, it puts you in a good position to do it for a living. I recognize there's a gap in the market, and at a time where competition is really high for jobs. You know, a lot of the jobs have been offshored that people would do, you know, 20 years ago, and a lot of the jobs are just thinning out because of technology. So the competition is very high, and I saw that gap and started to go after it and wanted to do something that had a personal impact instead of my audits, which I did for 21 years, and they certainly do not have a personal impact other than being, you know, aggravating people over and over every day of your life, which is kind of hard to do for 20 plus years. Eleanor Roosevelt said, "The great minds talk about ideas." It's a longer quote than that, right? But if you want to be a great mind, you need to open yourself up to thinking of things in terms of ideas instead of always focusing on people and events and what's going on around you. If you think about ideas, it can be very empowering. So if you want to cultivate your great mind, you got to change the way you think. It's probably the 50th time I've said that for good reason. I'm trying to really hammer it home because that's the key to you guys getting over this hurdle. Change the way you think. New ideas are the best way to do it. Think about what idea gets me to my next goal. What idea? What can I do different or new? Or what can I employ that I've never employed before? Or what did that person over there do? I'm going to go ask her what she did because she seems to have gotten over this hurdle. How did she do it? It'll give me some ideas. Ideas spring actions. And you may think you know all this stuff. You know, a lot of people are just kind of like, oh, this guy's just like platitude after platitude. I know all this crap. You don't. And if you do, you know it on the fringes, but you haven't embraced it or you wouldn't be here. So you're here because you need to embrace this stuff a lot more, and you absolutely can, and 90% of it is within your control. So in the 2013 job outlook from the Association of Colleges and Employers, these are the things they said that young employees are missing. Communication, teamwork, analyzing data, becoming proficient with new computer software, editing reports, influencing others. These are all soft skills, and these are the kinds of things that I built this course that I teach around. So if you think about your soft skills, the kinds of things we teach in my Career Acceleration Program, which is a 5-week night class, basically, essentially. It's like 10 hours of coaching, small group, kind of 20 or less people, coaching, talking about how do you impress your boss? How can you be a chameleon and master this change agility thing? How do you constantly expand your skill set and move yourself forward time after time after time? Because you need to keep reinventing if you want to find great success in your career. Solving problems and diffusing conflict. I mean, that's hard to do with a straight face. It's hard to bite your tongue. It's hard to sort of buckle down and deal with something that's in front of you when you don't really want to deal with it. We talk about career plans. We talk about networking and how do you get noticed? How do you be the one that the boss notices versus sort of the person that's getting rated average every year, maybe because you're not trying to get noticed. And you know, you do have to ring your own bell a little bit to find success in your career, and that's very uncomfortable for a lot of us. It took me a lot of years to get comfortable doing that, and it took me a lot of coaching other people to do it to realize that I could still get better at it myself in some ways. So it's 5 weeks. It comes, you know, if you come to the course, we have courses starting in March down in Philly at the Villanova Conference Center and down at the University of Delaware. Each person gets 45 minutes of individual coaching to talk about their personal situation, and I also look at resumes and critique them for people. I also do programs for workforce enrichment, which is for, you know, small to mid-size organizations, where I go in and work with leadership as well as the workforce and try and bring them to a happier place together. Places where the leadership is not good at people skills and they tend to fall all over themselves making mistakes, and you know it, but they don't know how to fix it. They're losing people right and left. They're hiring the wrong people to begin with and then trying to figure out how to fire them, or just dealing with their ineptitude. Those kinds of things, and then also using some of the pieces of the Career Acceleration Program in that organization to try and help strengthen the soft skill sets of their people. So feel free to, you know, share my name with your bosses. If you think you guys have people issues, you could quietly kind of say, hey, maybe you guys should call this guy and have a chat. And then I do individual coaching, which, as you can imagine, is exactly what that individual needs and what they're struggling with. So some people are dealing with a life situation, sometimes people are dealing with a career situation or a soft skill they really want to dig into, like networking, and they want to spend some really focused single one-on-one time doing that. So I do that kind of stuff as well. So if you think about the handout that you have in your hands, I tried to lay out for you in some words so that you have something to take with what these steps are, so that you can break it down and begin to apply it to yourself a little bit. So hopefully, with that said, we've talked about what it is. We talked about sort of how you arrived here. Great, we can put that all behind us. We get it. We get why we're here. We talked about redefining, which is what you start working on tomorrow. Redefining yourself and the way you see yourself, and redefining the way you see your career. And we talked about reframing your thinking about that stuff. How are you going to tackle those things? What steps can you take to tackle those things? And then we talked about me a little bit. So I think Dr. Olivia and I have some time for some questions. I'm sure that Kate is somewhere around here, but I don't see her, or I assumed she was. What questions do you have? I mean, what comes into mind? Anybody have a specific question? We'll also be hanging around afterwards if anybody wants to chat. And then Doug's going to tell us where we're going after that.
Somewhere close, it's cold.
Yeah, it is very cold. Luckily, there are plenty of close places to do that. Any questions?
I know you can't tell us like any concrete ways to further your career because a career path, individualized or idiosyncratic to like that individual. But perhaps maybe you could say like what key mistakes you think people our age make, or key chess moves they should make in like the first 10 years of their career. Someone who's aspiring to be at the executive level, someone who's want to rise up.
Yeah. I get asked that question a lot. I always start with hard work. If you're not working harder than everybody around you or as hard as the hardest workers around you, then you should start, because that's one of the key ways that you're going to get there. And that means hard work in terms of hours, and it means smart work, working smart, not just trying to clock hours, waiting till the boss leaves, and then trying to make it look like you're leaving after the boss. That kind of stuff is not what gets noticed. We do always in management meetings talk about the hard workers and how much they're putting in. I would say the other is career management. You got to manage your own career. Your company won't do it for you. And I noticed some people when they were young were managing their career. They took our career development process, which at PwC was very well evolved, as you can imagine, a big company like that. But they took it and they owned it from day one. And every time there was an opportunity to touch that career development process in some way or another, they would take it very seriously. They put the time in, and it was always their own time. You couldn't charge that time to clients. But they took it seriously because they knew that that was the path. That was the path they had charted for themselves. Other people would kind of mail it in. They would do self-assessments, which were really lame and not very thoughtful and didn't show any insight into themselves and their own development. And those were people that you would talk about and say, Jim kind of just mailed it in again this year. That's all he seems to do. So taking ownership of your career is another one that comes to mind. John, one that comes to mind for you?
Well, I guess the phrase emotional intelligence you may have heard of. And when you think of senior leaders, and especially people in the C-suite, executives and things, they have honed their emotional intelligence skills. They know themselves pretty well. And they know how to deal with others, how to manage conflict, how to negotiate well, and they're probably very good problem solvers as well. And additionally, they're probably making the people around them much better also. So the combination of a lot of those soft skills.
That's a terrific point. And there's good books on emotional intelligence out there. You go to Amazon, I always just look for one that's got over 100 reviews, 5 stars, and it's like, all right, it's got to be a good book. But there's books on the subject. I know one's called Emotional Intelligence, but I don't know if there's more than one with that name.
That's a primary one by Daniel Goleman, Emotional Intelligence. That'll get you started, and from there, there's others.
Any other questions?
What are some tips you would have for someone who's working for someone and want to transition to working for themselves or starting their own company?
Yeah, I mean, I guess having just done it, right, I would say don't take it lightly. There's a lot of components to it. You can do a lot of homework while you still have a job on what it is that you want to do to set yourself out and be a solopreneur or an entrepreneur in some way or another. Do a lot of homework because there's a lot of pieces to it. And you need to figure out the whole business plan. There's lots of great books on business plans, but you need to figure out the whole plan if you can buy yourself enough time before you leave your current job. And you'll find hurdles in that plan, things you're going to need to deal with, either outlays of capital that you may not have, and therefore you got to go figure out where you're going to get some capital from, or it may be development. In my case, it was development of content. I've got to write these courses and figure out what I'm teaching and what does it look like, and that meant I needed to do a lot of research to do that and get to that point. So it took me a lot of time to evolve that stuff. But I think if you put a business plan together and you follow even like business plans for dummies, which I have at home, it comes with a CD with lots of templates for a lot of things that you need to do. But even something like that makes you think about the whole of starting a business. And it's not easy. And a lot of people jump in too quickly and you wonder why small businesses fail. Often it's not because of a lack of passion. It's because somebody bit off more than they could chew and they didn't realize it. So just doing your homework and doing a lot of research up front and reading a lot for a while will help you to realize what your highest hurdles are going to be to get started. Anybody?
I really appreciate what your whole presentation and what you've said, especially you know, owning your own career and owning your path. And a part of that is, I think, what's also important is mentorship. What is your advice on finding a mentor and getting a mentor and all of those things?
Yeah, well, absolutely. Mentors are critical, and you should have more than one. You know, I always recommend that people try and have at least 3 mentors, and they might be for different aspects. One might be a career mentor, one might be sort of a life mentor. Sometimes that's one of your parents or somebody like that, or a brother or a sister, that kind of thing. And then you might have a mentor that's like a catch-all for everything else, somebody you go to with the other stuff, or they're all mixed. If there's somebody at work, you know, usually you start at work in your career with somebody you really admire. Somebody, whenever you interact with them, you respect what they do, you respect how they treat you, you respect how they treat others. Sometimes, you know, if you are kind of a jerk and they're a jerk, that might be your mentor. They're going to teach me how to be a bigger jerk, and you know, that's what you want. I've worked with a lot of jerks who have worked for jerks before that, and there's just like this fraternity of people that keep initiating one another into jerkhood or something. But there's usually somebody at work, and if it's not at your work, you can meet them sometimes at events like this, maybe broader chamber events where you might meet some older folks that are a little further into their career that are looking to meet new people, and they come to events because they run a small business, but they may be willing to take you under their wing, and you have to ask somebody to be your mentor. And don't be afraid to ask somebody. It's not like you're asking them to be your AA sponsor or something like that, you know. You're asking them just, you know, do you mind if I reach out to you from time to time? Do you mind if I take you out to lunch once a quarter? And you pay for lunch, and you take them out once a quarter, and you prepare for that meeting, and you have some questions, things you want to bounce off of them. How did you deal with this? I'm dealing with this right now. How did you do that? But you have to ask somebody, would you be willing to play that role? And people that are kind of the people you'll admire will want to play that role. You know, they'll enjoy it. People like sharing their experiences. Good people do. I find that successful people love to coach other people. It's the people that are, well, either jerks or unsuccessful that don't love to coach other people. But successful people love to coach other people. So go into events trying to figure out who they are. Start with your current network. I mean, start by building that LinkedIn network out. And you might just find somebody either directly that you reached out to or tangentially. Like it says, you know, you connected with your Aunt Sally, and all of a sudden it says people you may know. And it's like brings up this person you met once who was a high flyer in some business. And you're like, well, I wonder if Aunt Sally can introduce me back to that person, because I'd love to pick his or her brain about what's going on with me. And then maybe you go get a lunch with them, pick their brain, and you say, would you mind if we did this, you know, once a quarter, if I reached out to you when I'm having a challenge at work? And by and large, the good ones will always say yes. So that would be my answer. Anything on mentoring, John, you think about?
I would just think, know your own temperament, know what you're looking for in that regard. Find someone that's also going to challenge you a little bit. Maybe choose someone that you would not normally choose, but knowing yourself also. So, yeah.
One of the things, I work with a lot of executives in my role, it's kind of unique, but a lot of the things the companies are doing right now is they're asking their senior executives to do reverse mentoring, so to work with the young professional and find out how our minds work. Because for someone in like their 50s, like, they have no clue how our brains work, what motivates us. And a lot of companies are starting programs for reverse mentoring, so that's a great opportunity for us to be able to get exposure to what they're doing and also for them to learn from us. And from what I've seen, it's a really great way to get people to work more closely together who have different generational backgrounds.
Yeah, we talk about that in the course too. It's a great opportunity for young people. You talk about wanting to get noticed and singled out in a good way. Reverse mentoring is a great way to do it. I mean, the old folks around, the older they are, the less they understand how to maximize the use of technology, the less they understand in many ways about efficiency. I mean, I can't tell you how many old partners would ask us, can you print out the database for me? You know, I want to do my review. And we'd be like, if we print it out, it could be like 2,000 pages. Do you understand? Like, just print it out, put it in one of these cases we used as auditors, and roll it to my office or bring it to my house if they were really jerky. And you would do it, and then they'd review everything in paper. And all they needed to do was read, point, and click, and it seemed so simple to us, but they were scared to death of it. And I see it with my parents, and you see it sometimes, it's scary for them because it's change, right? Something new, it's scary. It doesn't seem scary to you, but it's scary to them. Using the reverse mentoring concept, which companies are doing, and it's good to hear companies are doing it in a mutually beneficial way too, because when that younger person gets time with that older person, they can also ask them questions about how did you get where you were, or how did you deal with this kind of stage of your life. But it also gives you an opportunity to help them be better at their job. and find a more efficient way to approach something that they didn't even know was out there. Show them an app that they have right on their phone that they didn't even realize they could use to manage something. So great point. Thank you for bringing it up.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that, especially if you have managers or superiors who, you talked about the water cooler and the gossiping, just how you can deal with that when it's sort of someone who you're reporting to that wants to spend a lot of time gossiping and being negative.
Yeah, I mean, what I've coached people to do before is to try and slowly remove yourself from the situation. And you have to do it slowly. You can't just one day not be there for them when they want to go get your regular coffee that you get a certain time of day. But you can slowly remove yourself. And if at any point, work is not always about, saving or hurting people's feelings or whatever. I mean, if that person were to say to you, how come you don't seem to want to hang out much anymore? It's just like, well, I'm trying to take a more positive view on my career. And I'm trying to just stay out of, looking at the bad side. So I'd love to go to coffee, but can we just talk about all the good things over coffee? Because I'm trying to keep my spirits up and keep positive about my career. And they may say, oh, that's ridiculous. And, they may say stuff, but it's your career. It's not their career. They can do whatever the hell they want. You need to slowly remove yourself from people like that, because people like that will just bring you down. But if it's somebody you see every day, or somebody that sits right next to you, or somebody you absolutely cannot avoid physically, you just have to try and find a way to tune it out. And maybe if you go out and they open the subject with some kind of complaint or whining about something, maybe you just say, you know what I thought we could talk about today was this. What's happening in our industry. I was just reading our annual report that just came out, or I was just reading the letter from the president about this. And what do you think of this? Is this interesting? And if they say interesting, I think it's bullshit. If that's what they're going to say, we'll just say, well, I actually thought it was really interesting, and here's why. And I'm in this because I'm trying to grow and develop. You have to change the conversation. Don't let that person dominate the conversation. And if that's all they do is dominate the conversation, you got to slowly try and remove yourself if you can. We got to wrap up real quick, but I'm going to be around. I don't know what John's plan is. Are you going to be around a little bit? Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Kate and Jake for inviting us to talk. Thanks, guys.